doing? Changes from the Hellbound Heart. The main protagonist in the Hellbound Heart is not Pinhead among the Cenobites, it is the female Cenobite. And of course, as with the movie, in the book, Pinhead has no name. All of the Cenobites are anonymous in the Hellbound Heart as they are in Hellraiser. The names were given to us by the members of the special effects makeup crew, because while they're working on the makeups in the workshop, prepping the first movie, they can't keep calling us lead Cenobite and Cenobite number 1 and Cenobite number 2, so they had to call us something. So they named us Pinhead, Chatterer, Butterball, and Deep Throat, which was why the female Cenobite continued to be credited as the female Cenobite. The main changes for me, I suppose, are that Clive describes the character in the Hellbound Heart. He says that he had at each cross section of horizontal and vertical lines, a jeweled pin was driven through to the bone. So originally, Clive sees pins with a jeweled head on it. Now the first version of the makeup did have pins, and if you've got the anyone with the Anchor Bay, I forget which anniversary edition, the one that has the white cover with the large gold box on it. The image on the reverse of that is an image taken at the screen test, where I did have pins. The problem with that was that it was agreed that when the camera came up good and close to me, everything looked great. But when the camera moved any distance away, you just couldn't read the pins at all. So Pinhead just looked completely bald. So they kind of made them more like nails, chunkier, as you actually see them in the movie. And the jewels went. The other thing Clive describes in the book is that Pinhead had a row of bells sewn through the flesh at the back of his neck, so that everywhere he went, he was accompanied by this jingling sound. Now that may sound great on the page. On a movie, it's just going to sound hilarious. If Pinhead is doing jingle bells everywhere he goes, it's, you know. And then Clive describes him as having a light, breathy voice like that of an excited girl, which wasn't what I did. So those are the main differences, but otherwise I think the character moved from the page to the screen fairly intact, I think. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
Perfectly.
You all seem very far away. Hi. Good.
So we had talked before, and you talked about the voice editing that they did for you from the first all the way through all of the films. So if you could tell the fans a little bit about that process from the different studios.
Well, when I stepped up to my mark to deliver my first line on Hellraiser, which was also my first line in movies. Hellraiser was my first movie. That line was, "We want the man who did this." I realized I hadn't really had any conversation with Clive about how Pinhead was going to sound. And I didn't know whether because I knew the movie was being produced out of Los Angeles, for all I knew, they would want Pinhead to be American. So I didn't know whether I was going to get revoiced by a voiceover artist. Usual actors' insecurities. You step up to the mark, and suddenly you don't have a clue how to do this or what you're going to do, and you just kind of, you know, turn the ignition and hope you don't crash. So I simply went with the voice as I heard it in my head, and that's pretty much as you hear it when you see the film. So I played the lines all in a deeper register than my normal speaking voice. But I always say I'm good, but I'm not that good. I can't make myself sound exactly like that. When we'd finished the movie, I went to Delaney Studios in Soho in London to record all my lines again so that they had them clean, so that they could then play with them. I don't know exactly what they did with them. It always sounded to me like it was slightly slowed down, maybe double tracked, and maybe they shifted the pitch down slightly. Sounded pretty damn good, whatever they did to it. So then, that would have been in 1987. Incidentally, trivia lovers, Hellraiser premiered 20, I've lost my grip on maths, 28 years ago yesterday. It premiered on 9/11. So that would be 1987, early part of 1987 that I was doing that. And then in 1988, we shot Hellbound. I went back to Delaney Studios again to re-record all my lines. And when I went in, the same guys who said to me, hi Doug, you know, we wish we'd known there was going to be a sequel, because we'd have taken notes. We have no idea what we did to make you sound the way you did. So we're going to have to make it up all over again, which they did. Then jump forward with me to 1992 or 1993. Hellraiser 3, which was the first movie shot in the US, shot in North Carolina, some reshoots in LA. I went into a studio in LA to re-record all my lines. I walk in and they say to me, hey, hi Doug, so tell us, what is it we need to do to make you sound like Pinhead? Great, you know, I'm only the actor, I'm not the sound technician. So I said, unless you can get in touch with Pinewood and they still had production notes, I have no idea. So they made it up all over again. As far as I'm aware, I mean, Hellseeker was shot in Vancouver. Deader and Hellworld was shot, God help us all, in Romania. So it was different people doing it every time, and I'm pretty certain that Pinhead's voice was created from scratch for every single movie, because nobody ever made a definitive record of exactly what was needed to make the voice sound the way it did.
It's an interesting story about the voice work on Nightbreed too, right? The voice acting for your character on Nightbreed, what they've done to that as well.
Well, Nightbreed, which I played Lylesburg, in the process of Fox screwing the movie into the ground, I got a phone call in London from Los Angeles informing me that they were going to revoice the character. There was no negotiation involved, they were just telling me. I think what they were telling me was, we need to re-record your lines, which is very common. For whatever reason, there are noises on set, or just they haven't quite got the line clean, or whatever it may be. I think what they were saying was, we're not about to put you on a plane and fly you out to Los Angeles, maybe first class, and put you up in a hotel for a couple of nights with all that expense, when we can get some guy up the road in the studio for an hour and a half for $50, I think was what they were telling me. Quite why Lylesburg acquired a German accent in the process, I have no idea. I never played him with a German accent. Nobody ever suggested he should have a German accent. I think an executive or maybe the voiceover artist, you know, Lylesburg sounds like Carlsberg, must be German, he must drink lager. So he acquired a German accent, though I always say it sounded to me like a German accent belonging to someone who lived in Hong Kong for a while. It sounded slightly strange to me. So one of the joys of the director's cut of Nightbreed, the Cabal cut, is that for me, Lylesburg got his voice back, got my voice back, which was nice.
So I'm a big Clive Barker fan, brilliant man, one of your friends.
Yes.
Tell the audience how you guys first connected, got together, and have begun to work with each other so many times.
Okay, I will take you back to my hometown of Liverpool. This would be about 1968 or 69, and I'm at Quarrybank High School in Liverpool. I'm aware of this guy, slightly flamboyant character, who I used to see parading around the corridors, usually with a silk scarf flung over one shoulder. And he was then writing, directing, starring in, and hand-drawing the posters for his own plays, which were produced at high school, with titles like Voodoo and Inferno. So you can see that Clive's imagination hasn't moved too far in the last 50 years. And I went to see one of these plays. I have only hazy memories, including ballet dancing Nazis attempting to take over the world. I would be about 15, and my friend Jimmy Hughes said to me, "I'm going to be in the school play." And I've never been quite this forward, I don't think, ever as an actor again. I said, well, fuck you, if you're going to be in the school play, I'm going to be in the school play. So I went to a guy called Bruce Prince, who directed the school plays and was also our form teacher, and said, "Hey, sir, Jimmy Hughes says he's going to be in the school play. I want to be in the school play too." And he looked at me and he said, "Okay, all right, come with me." He would never be allowed to get away with this today. He took me into the cloakroom, and he put a copy of a play in front of me, which was The Government Inspector by Nikolai Gogol, and he said, "Read that." So I did, and he said, "Okay, you're in the school play." And I walked into rehearsals for the school play, and there in the cast was Clive. So that was our first meeting, and I got kind of pulled into his orbit in the school. The head teacher, by the name of William Pobjoy, used to basically give Clive permission to take over the school hall for a week to put on his productions. I think he had spotted a talent that he couldn't control, he couldn't do anything about. I have a treasured story of a wonderful English teacher who was that teacher. Everybody has that teacher. He was that teacher, particularly for Clive. Norman had been taught by J.R.R. Tolkien when he was at Oxford, and he had set a piece of original composition as homework to Clive's form. Clive gets this back, and Norman has written at the bottom, "See me," those dread words that make every schoolboy quake in their shoes. So Clive went up to see Norman, who said, "Yes, do you have any idea why I wrote this?" And Clive said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, I am unable to mark this. This is too good for me to pass judgment on. I would like to talk to you after school." And he basically took him to one side and said, "You have an extraordinary talent," and basically lit the fire underneath that for him, or helped to. So that was where our relationship started. Where after school and university we started doing weird experimental theatre in Liverpool, stuff where we would take a year to put a show together, improvise from scratch, and then perform it once, and it would be gone. We moved down to London, we formed a theatre called The Dog Company, putting on original plays by Clive that were completely ignored by everybody, which are published now and have been performed here in the States. The History of the Devil, in which I played the devil, Frankenstein in Love, which I played Dr. Frankenstein, The Secret Life of Cartoons, in which I played Bugs Bunny. That kind of took us into the early 1980s, and then that kind of ended. Clive was giving me handwritten manuscripts to read, and he said to me, I'm trying to write a few horror stories, short horror stories, to see if I can make some money. Those stories were the books of blood, and at some point in there also the Hellbound Heart. And then about 3 years later, for the first time, he mentioned to me that he was trying to put together what he described as an independent, low-budget British horror movie together, and I think there might be a part in there for you. That was Hellraiser, and that was Pinhead.
So we talked about this at another convention, sort of things on the internet that aren't true. Which,
how long do we have?
So the one story is, were you really offered the part for the guy that was carrying the mattress?
You have the picture? Can you put it up on the screen? If you've got a picture on the phone, can you put it up on the screen? No. Probably not. No. Is it on the internet? Oh, we put it on my Facebook. It's on my Facebook page. Yes, well, I mentioned once in an interview, only once, and boy did that ever start a forest fire, that although all my conversations with Clive had been about Pinhead, when Chris Figg, the producer, called me, which was the call to say, okay, this is it, it's happening, he said there is one other part available, which was the part of the guy who delivers the mattress to Larry and Julia's house, and Larry cuts his finger and the blood goes on the floor, and that begins the birth of Frank. And what I said in the interview was that there was a moment where I thought, this is my first movie. Maybe it would be a good idea if I'm actually going to be recognizable in this movie, so that if I'm going to auditions and people say, what have you done lately, I can say, I was in Hellraiser, and I played that role, and they might recognize me. Because all I was thinking was, otherwise I'm completely anonymous in Hellraiser, I'm buried in latex. But it really, it really didn't exercise my mind very long, because I always kind of knew that this guy with the pins and the one-liners was a little bit more interesting than the mattress delivery guy. And with the best will in the world, knowing what a wonderfully loyal audience you are, if I'd chosen to play him, I doubt whether I'd be sitting here now answering questions about my performance as the mattress delivery guy. He was played by Clive Barker, who had also been a member of the Dog Company and is now a director. Of course, he reprised his role as the mattress delivery guy, so memorable was his performance in Hellbound. So I would have got 2 movies out of the deal, at least. And he went on to play Peliquin in Nightbreed, and is now a director. Directed The Picture of Dorian Gray recently, which was particularly good, I thought. And recently, Steph and I bought a new mattress, which just about squeezed into the back of our hearse. So I drove the hearse to Big Lots. I'm a cheapskate, and squeezed the mattress in the back of the hearse, and that's me getting the mattress out of the back of the hearse. And we paused and thought, here I am at last. I am the mattress. No longer the mattress delivery guy, but I chose to play him instead. I might have made the right decision. But I swear I said it once in an interview, jokingly, and I'm still answering the goddamn question.
So another thing I saw on the internet was that Pinhead was supposed to be called Priest at first.
Oh, he was?
That's what. Hey,
Oh, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true. I never heard that. I think this may be a confusion because Clive has just written the Scarlet Gospels, or he hasn't just written it, he's been writing it for about 10 years, but he's called, because he always felt, obviously, that Pinhead was not his character's name. In the Scarlet Gospels, he's referred to it as Hell Priest. So I wonder whether that's where Priest is from. He always said that there was what he said to me was that I should think of Pinhead as being a cross between a butcher and a monk. So there was always that religious element. So he may at some point have been referred to as a priest, but I certainly don't think he was ever going to be called Priest. Judas, maybe.
So, unlike other recognizable horror figures, Pinhead was bound by rules. Talk about adding to the complexity of that character with the rules aspect.
Yes, I've always said that the shorthand in my head approaching the movie was, I'm going to play the bad guy, I'm going to play the monster in a horror film. That's pretty cool. What was evident to me reading the screenplay and as the movie went on is that, of course, he is not the monster. Frank and Julia are the monsters. It's a familiar element in Clive's work. It drives Nightbreed. That the breed really want nothing more than to be left alone to live their lives under the cemetery. The Nightbreed are the good guys, and the humans are the bad guys. That's the bit that Fox couldn't wrap their tiny little heads around. And I felt very much the same thing with Pinhead, reading the screenplay and as we worked our way through the film, that really he's an impartial judge in the proceedings. He's not a boogeyman. He's not going to operate like Leatherface or Freddy or Michael or Jason. He's not hiding around the corner waiting to jump on you. There are a whole series of steps that you have to go through. You have to become aware of the existence of the lament configuration. You have to find the lament configuration. You have to successfully bargain for it. You have to work out how to open it. And even then, Pinhead says in Hellbound, when Tiffany opens the box, it is not hands that call us, it is desire. So even at that point, it's about your motivation. And he is always interested to pause and engage in conversation with you, to draw you out. He wants to know who you are and what you're about and what's going on down in the dark, dirty bits of your mind and your soul. And then he'll tear it apart. But there's a process to get there. So he's not going to, he's not interested, like a lot of horror movie killers, he's not interested in killing you just because you're black, or just because you smoke pot, or just because you make out on the beach. You know, the rules for being killed in a slasher movie are are really of no interest at all to Pinhead. He has stranger things to worry about than smoking dope and getting laid.
So we've mentioned the Scarlet Gospels now. It's been very successful. What is the word on being able to take that to the big screen now?
No word that I have heard. That rhymed. I have no idea. It would not surprise me if somebody somewhere isn't talking about it. God knows it would be an ambitious project. If anyone has read the Scarlet Gospels, you'll know what I mean. This is fantasy horror on a grand theological, cosmological scale. Would involve a lot of green screen acting, I suspect. But if those plans are gaining any traction, I know nothing. But I would probably be the last person to know about it anyway.
So one question I'm sure everybody wants to know the answer to.
I feel like this is good cop, bad cop here. I'm starting to sweat in the middle. I don't know anything. I wasn't there. She did it.
Your thoughts on Hellraiser Revelations?
My thoughts on Hellraiser Revelations. Okay, well, middle of July 2010, I get a phone call, not from anyone at Dimension Films, from Gary Tunnicliffe, who applied the Pinhead's makeup from Bloodline onwards, to tell me that there is going to be another Hellraiser movie, because apparently somebody in the legal department at Dimension Films had spotted in the fine print of their master contract that if they didn't have a movie in front of the screen by September the 3rd, they would lose the rights to the franchise. That was the motivation for making the film. So we're in the middle of July. This movie is not written, it's not cast, it's not crewed, it's not prepped, and they want the movie in front of the camera in less than 6 weeks. Now, in my humble opinion, here I go talking myself out of ever working with the Weinsteins again. They were nothing but bad for the franchise from the day they got involved. A lot of the problems with Bloodline were directly down to them. Inferno, Hellseeker, and Deader are all pre-existing horror scripts that were tweaked to become Hellraiser movies, because they're too damn lazy to go out and commission an original Hellraiser story from somebody. And don't tell me that there aren't a lot of writers that they could have gone to with that brief, because there are, which meant that Hellworld was bizarrely the first original Hellraiser script since Bloodline when we made that movie. So I didn't see, frankly, why I should be expected to bend over and take one up the tradesman's entrance to save their skins. My basic feeling was, if you care so little about this, that you go this close to the wire to lose the franchise, well, hey, maybe you should lose the franchise and let it go to someone who gives a shit. But I did ask to see the screenplay, and that made my mind up. So I said no. And they wanted me in LA for 2 days for, you know, well, the price of a new fridge is what I always say. Barely that, I think. So I turned it down. Now, I wish no ill will to anybody ever involved in making a movie, because it's an extremely difficult process. Good luck to the guy who got to play Pinhead. I have not seen the movie. I've seen the trailer on YouTube. And what I always say is, if my ego is ever feeling at a low ebb, all I need to do is go to the trailer on YouTube and read the comments underneath. Well, let me say I've yet to hear any comment from any fan that would lead me to believe that I made the wrong decision. I have been bathing in love for not making a movie, which is kind of weird. That's Revelations.
So ask you one more question, then there's a lot of people in the audience. I'm sure they have many questions for you, so get those ready. But it seemed like the MPAA kind of just gave Clive carte blanche in the first movie to go ahead and make his vision. What do you think that reason for that was?
In terms of cuts to the first film,
content.
well, I'm not sure what the MPAA did, to be honest, because I was in London at the time, so I'm not authoritative on that. I know that when the movie came back to the BBFC, which was then called the British Board of Film Certification, though they've now honestly turned the C to censorship, so it's the British Board of Film Censorship now. They only asked for one further cut, is all I know, which was there was one point where Julia is taking the hammer to one of her victims. She brings the hammer down on his head, and there's a cut back to Julia, and she had a half smile on her face. And the BBFC said you can't do that because it implies that she's getting some kind of sexual gratification out of doing this. And I'm sure that thought never occurred to Clive, ever, and never occurred to Claire Higgins, ever. That, as far as I'm aware, was the only additional cut that they asked for. I'll tell you this story quickly. I did Claire's screen test for her, playing the victim with the weak bladder. And they had rigged up a large block of foam and then duct taped it to the wall of the soundstage. So all I had to do was walk in. The camera is behind me, obviously, because the camera is on Claire, and say, I need to use the bathroom. She tells me where it is. I turn around, and then all I do, having turned around, facing the camera, is drop out of frame, so Claire can swing the hammer when I'm clear of frame and smash it into the foam on the wall. So action, we do it, I drop, thwack. There's a long pause, and then a slightly nervous voice said, cut. Okay, I don't think we need to do that again. And I came up, and I could see people behind the camera kind of... And Selwyn Roberts, who was the first AD, said to me, I think she has the part. She missed you by that much. She wasn't waiting for you to get out of the way. If you'd gone any slower, I think she would have hit you. So we, in an alternative universe, when you read your histories of horror films, I'm a footnote. Actually, Claire and I are footnotes, because when it talks about the casting for Hellraiser, there'll be a footnote to say that Clive Barker's longtime friend and colleague Doug Bradley was due to play the part of Pinhead, but was unfortunately killed at Claire Higgins' screen test, and Claire Higgins was unable to play the role because she spent the rest of her life in prison for the murder of Doug Bradley. And I've always said, you get left with a very, very strange perversion in Hellraiser, because the movie was written and was filmed to be set in London. Then New World decided they wanted a sequel, and they wanted it set in America, so there was a kind of backfilling process to make Hellraiser look as though it's taking place in America. So Kirsty's boyfriend acquires an American accent, though he was intended to be British, because the idea was she's followed her father to London. But all of Julia's victims retain British accents, which leaves you with this bizarre idea that when Julia goes out to seek her victims in whichever unnamed American city Hellraiser is taking place in, she's trawling the bars looking for balding British guys to bring back to the house and kill.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Bradley?
Good afternoon, Doug.
Hi.
My question is about the makeup.
Okay.
Is it like one whole piece? How long did it take to apply all this makeup to you?
Not one piece. In the first 2 movies, 6 separate sections with the nails preset in the latex. Subsequent movies, it came down to a 2-piece. Slightly disastrously so for Hellraiser 3, and much more satisfactorily so after that. So basically, you start with a bald cap. It was slightly more necessary then than it might be now. And then the sections get glued on to my face and to the bald cap, and then everything gets painted in. So there was a piece up the neck, onto the head, up to here, around the back of the ears, brows down to the top of the eyes, nose and cheek, mouth, and neck that met that bit round the side. Initially, it took about 5 or 6 hours, which speeded up to about 3 or 4 hours.
Good.
I always called it the commute. Nobody wants to do it, but if you want to go to work, you have no choice.
Back there?
So, were you surprised when Cradle of Filth asked you to narrate on some of their albums?
Oh, there you are. Hello, I could hear a voice, but I couldn't see anything. Surprised? Well, to the extent that I wasn't expecting it. I kind of knew Danny already, and I'd met him around the time of the filming of Cradle of Fear, the movie that he was in. But I was not a close follower of Cradle of Filth. I am a major disappointment to my fans. I'm obsessed with music, and I listen to all kinds of music. There isn't a day that goes by that I'm not doing that. And heavy metal and death metal are not among my listening choices. Always struck me as very dull. Sorry. Although I do think Cradle were better than most, and I liked Danny's writing. I always thought he was a good writer, and I will say I saw him I saw Cradle in concert in Baltimore several years ago. It was the penultimate gig of their US tour, and I'm astonished that this tiny little runt of a guy produces this voice. Where the hell it comes from, I have no idea. And he has the 2 voices. He has the deep roar and that falsetto voice as well. And I don't know how he holds that together for a whole tour without wrecking his voice, but his voice sounded in perfect condition. I simply got a phone call from Faye Wolven, who was the band's manager, and said Danny was wondering if you would contribute some spoken lyrics to Midian. And we don't have very much money, but here's what we can offer you. And I said sure, and I drove down from London to Battle in Sussex, which was where Danny was living then, and they had a studio nearby, and spent a couple of hours recording stuff for them. I also gained new respect because there were a couple of tracks that I had to record to the rhythm of what they were playing. And I came out of that saying, if we do this again, could you do something in 4/4 time for me rather than whatever this 23:15 time signature was. I'm trying to catch an onbeat and an offbeat in there somewhere, pretty much failing. So that was Midian, and then I got a call from Faye. Danny was wondering if, and I said sure, and that was, I lose track of the chronology, but that was either Thornography or Nymphetamine, whichever came next. And then I got a call from Faye. Danny was wondering if, and that was whichever one it wasn't. And then I got another call for Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder. So I did those 4 albums back to back. Godspeed, we recorded in Danny's house in Ipswich in Suffolk. And I suggested that they should change their name to Doug Bradley and Cradle of Filth, since they were clearly becoming my backing band. That must have pissed him off, because he hasn't asked me since then. But it was always fun working with them.
Gentleman in the back.
Which Hellraiser film was your favorite?
Where are you? Oh, there you are. Hello. Favorite as a movie?
Yeah.
Hellraiser. The first one.
All right, we have time for one more. I'll get this person up here.
I've always been curious about what Clive Barker thought of the other Hellraiser movies besides the first one, based on his name not appearing much in the cast or credits in the DVDs I've looked at. Obviously Revelations is right out, but what about the others?
Well, I shouldn't speak on Clive's behalf, really. Hellbound he would have no excuses for, because it was his storyline, and he was executive producer. And he was around a lot while we were filming. Hellraiser 3 he had nothing to do with until we got to reshoots. That was the point at which Miramax came into the deal. They wanted to put Clive's name on the masthead. Clive Barker, or Clive Barker's Hellraiser 3, whatever. And he said, okay, but I want to see what I'm putting my name to. And he asked for some changes, some new stuff, which we shot in LA. So he must have signed off on it, because he was credited as executive producer. So he must have been happy enough with what he had. Bloodline was his storyline, and he was executive producer, so he has no excuses there either. Inferno onwards, he had nothing to do with. It is fairly much a matter of record that when Inferno was finished, Scott Derrickson, who was the writer-director and the producer, approached Clive and said, we'd like a quote from you for the movie. Clive said, okay, well, send me the movie and I'll look at it. Clive looked at it and said, you want a quote? Okay, here's a quote. Quote unquote, it's a piece of shit. So that's fairly unequivocal. I'm pretty certain that Hellseeker and Deader he was okay with. Because I know that the director kept in close touch with him while he was putting his director's cut together, which wasn't going to be the final cut. I'm pretty certain he was okay with those. Hellworld, I've no idea. Revelations, well, I know that after I was approached about Revelations, I sent an email to Clive to say, I've just had this phone call, thought maybe you should know about this, which produced a what the fuck from Clive. So he wasn't delighted about Revelations happening at all, and I don't know of anything definitive, but I can't imagine he would have been overjoyed with the end results. I think he would be the first to say that, and it's inevitably true, that once you get into sequels, you're in trouble. You know, everybody sits down to watch Hellraiser. Nobody is any the wiser. The notion of Cenobites has never crossed anybody's mind, except Clive's, up to that point. When you sit down to watch the sequel, everything is different. Everybody has their own opinion now. Everybody's a director, everybody's a writer, everybody's a critic. So you're already on a hiding to nothing. And you have to start explaining. And I've always said that a lot of the power of Pinhead in particular stems from the fact that at the end of in the first movie, he steps into the hospital and he sets about explaining who they are. We're Cenobites. You're what? We are explorers in the further regions of experience. Huh? He spends a lot of time telling you about what they are in ways that tells you absolutely nothing about what they are or where they come from. And at the end of the movie, you're none the wiser. Once you get into sequels, you get into backstories, you have to start explaining, you get familiar with the character inevitably will get diluted, and the law of diminishing returns will set in. I mean, I think we're as guilty as anybody of that. I think it's unavoidable, to be honest, with the exception of Toy Story. But I think we kept our heads above water pretty well. So I think that there would be a mixture of disappointments and pleasant surprises for Clive along the way. Don't know, but question for him maybe, really.
Scarecon, give it up for Doug Bradley.
Thank you, guys.